72 hours ago, the radar screens at NATO's Combined Air Operations Center in Udaid didn't just flicker, they went dark. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a solar flare. It was a synchronized multi-domain surgical strike that shouldn't have been possible. We're talking about a blackout of the most sophisticated sensor array on the planet, executed not by a superpower, but by a nation we've spent 3 decades trying to cage. Welcome to the new reality. For years, the consensus in the E-ring of the Pentagon was that Iran was a nuisance, a regional actor with a lot of loud rockets and even louder rhetoric. We viewed their arsenal as a collection of vintage Scuds and lawnmower engine drones. But while we were playing checkers with sanctions, Tehran was playing high-stakes poker with Moscow. The images hit the Director of National Intelligence's desk at A400 Tuesday. Satellite forensics from the Caspian coast didn't show the usual IRGC workshops. They showed something much more clinical. We saw the unmistakable silhouettes of Russian S-400 Triumph batteries being integrated into the Iranian Bavar network. We saw Su-35 flankers, jets that can dance around an F-15, running hot pit refuels at underground bases we didn't even know existed. But it's the math that has the Joint Chiefs staring into the abyss. Right now, as you watch this, there is a frantic scramble in the subterranean vaults of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. They're looking at the swarm. This isn't a wave of drones, it's a digital architecture of death. In the opening minutes of the 72-hour blackout, Iran didn't just fire missiles, they launched a saturation event. The Pentagon is terrified because the math of modern warfare just broke. For 30 years, the United States has relied on a doctrine of technological overmatch. If they fire a $1,000 rocket, we hit it with a $4 million Interceptor. It worked in the 90s. It worked in the 2000s. But it's a strategy built on the assumption that the enemy has a bottom to their barrel. In this new Russian-armed Iran, the barrel has no bottom. We are looking at the SM-3 and the Patriot PAC-3, the crown jewels of our integrated air and missile defense. These are marvels of engineering, kinetic kill vehicles that hit a bullet with a bullet in the vacuum of space. Each one costs more than a fleet of luxury cars. And 72 hours ago, we watched Iran expend 400 disposable drones to bait out just 20 of these interceptors. Do you understand the gravity of that ratio? We are burning through 5 years of production capacity in 5 hours of combat. The interceptor math isn't just skewed, it's terminal. If a full-scale conflict ignites tomorrow, the U.S. Navy's vertical launch systems will be empty by the end of the first week. And once those tubes are dry, the most powerful carrier strike groups in history become nothing more than billion-dollar targets floating in a pond. This isn't just about the Middle East anymore. This is the collapse of the post-Cold War military order. For 3 decades, the U.S. has operated under the sanctuary principle, the idea that our logistics, our bases, and our home ports were untouchable. That's over. Russia hasn't just given Iran arms, they've given them a counter-access area denial blueprint. They've turned Iran into a jagged, high-tech fortress that sits right on the jugular of global energy. The reason the Pentagon's halls are silent right now is that they've realized they can't outshoot this problem. They can't outproduce it. Every time an Iranian commander pushes a button to launch a $50,000 Shahed series drone, he isn't trying to blow up a building. He's trying to bankrupt the American taxpayer. He's trying to force a choice. Do we defend the Persian Gulf, or do we keep enough interceptors in the shed to protect Taiwan? We've reached the gridlock. The intelligence failure wasn't missing the shipments. It was missing the intent. We thought Russia was selling scrap metal for cash. In reality, they were exporting an asymmetrical virus designed to drain the American arsenal until we are militarily insolvent. 72 hours ago, the screens went dark. When they came back up, the world had changed. The U.S. is no longer the undisputed sheriff of the global commons. We are a gambler who just realized the House has been counting our chips from the start. And the House just called our bluff. The boardroom at Lockheed Martin has a specific kind of silence. It's the sound of a $100 billion investment evaporating in real time. For 30 years, we sold the world a dream: stealth. We told the American taxpayer that if we spent enough on radar-absorbent material and internal weapons bays, our pilots were ghosts, invisible, untouchable. That dream died 72 hours ago over the Persian Gulf. It didn't die because of a lucky shot. It died because of the S-500 Prometheus. This isn't just an upgrade to the S-400, it's a fundamental rewrite of the physics of the kill chain. To understand why an F-35 pilot is currently the most vulnerable man in the sky, you have to understand the architecture of the unseen. Sir Bilstein. Standard Western radar relies on the X-band, high frequency, high resolution, perfect for tracking a target once you know where it is. Our stealth tech is specifically designed to deflect those X-band waves. We shape the wings, we bury the engines, and the radar bounce goes anywhere but back to the receiver. But the S-500 doesn't play by the X-band rules. The Prometheus utilizes a multispectral, networked radar array that operates across the L-band, S-band, and X-band simultaneously. Think of it like a light spectrum. If the X-band is a flashlight trying to find a mirror in a dark room, the L-band is the room's ambient light. You can't hide a physical object from the L-band. It doesn't care about your serrated edges or your fancy coatings. The wavelength is too long. To an L-band digital ESA radar, an F-22 Raptor doesn't look like a bird. It looks like a shimmering distortion in the atmosphere. The S-500's 77T6 ABM radar takes that L-band distortion and hands it off to the X-band fire control with a mathematical precision we thought was impossible. They aren't seeing the plane. They are calculating the hole where the plane has to be. They've turned stealth into a geometry problem, and the Russians just found the variable we were trying to hide. Now let's talk about the kinetic reality, the spear at the end of that radar logic. Meet the 77N6N and the 77N6N1. These aren't missiles. They are hypersonic interceptors designed to kill satellites in low Earth orbit and ICBMs in their terminal phase. And now they're being used to swat tactical aircraft out of the sky at altitudes we used to consider safe. The 77N6N is a monster. We're talking about a solid fuel rocket motor that accelerates the kill vehicle to Mach 9. That's nearly 7,000 miles per hour. At those speeds, the physics of evasion cease to exist. If you're a pilot and that seeker head wakes up, you don't outturn it. You don't chaff it. The 77N6N1 variant uses a hit-to-kill kinetic warhead. No explosives, just pure, unadulterated mass moving at hypersonic velocity. It's a flying telephone pole that hits with the force of a small tactical nuke, except the energy is concentrated into a single point of impact. The altitude reach of these interceptors is 200 kilometers. That effectively closes the sky. It turns the upper atmosphere into a kill zone where the U.S. Air Force has no countermeasures. We spent billions on the next generation jammer, thinking we could drown out the enemy's ears. But you can't jam a system that is using passive sensor fusion and quantum-hardened data links. Put yourself in the cockpit of an F-35 Lightning II. You're at 35,000 feet, cruising through contested airspace. You feel confident. Your glass cockpit tells you the world is clear. The electronic warfare suite is silent. You are the apex predator. And then the tone starts. It's not the frantic, high-pitched chirp of a legacy SAMLOC. It's a low, steady pulse. That's the S-500's Yenisei radar painting you from 200 miles away. You look at your displays. You're dumping every ounce of electronic noise you have into the ether, trying to break the lock. You're banking hard, pulling 9 Gs, trying to put your smallest cross-section toward the threat. But the pulse doesn't break. It gets faster. In that moment, the silence in the cockpit is deafening. You realize that the stealth you've bet your life on is just a placebo. You are a brightly lit target in a digital shooting gallery. The 77N6N has already cleared the atmosphere. It's looking down on you from the edge of space, calculating an intercept point that your flight computer can't even visualize. You have approximately 12 seconds of life remaining. There is no maneuver in the pilot's manual for a Mach 9 kinetic interceptor coming from the stratosphere. The Pentagon's terror stems from this specific engineering dead end. No, worries. For 40 years, our entire military-industrial complex has been a stealth factory. We optimized our carriers for stealth planes. We optimized our doctrine for stealth infiltration. We built the most expensive military in human history on the assumption that the enemy's radar could be defeated by shape and material. The S-500 proves that assumption was a catastrophic error. When Russia moved these batteries into Iranian territory, they didn't just provide air defense. They created a transparency zone. They've made the Persian Gulf and every American asset within it transparent. We are currently facing an engineering gap that cannot be bridged by a software patch or a new coat of paint. To defeat the S-500 architecture, we would need to redesign the fundamental propulsion and airframe systems of every jet in the inventory. We are talking about 20 years and $5 trillion of R&D that we don't have. And meanwhile, the 77 N6 missiles are sitting in their canisters, cooled and ready, waiting for the next ghost to wander into their math. The math is cold. The physics are colder. Keep your eyes on the horizon. It's getting crowded. Wars aren't won on the battlefield. They are won on the balance sheet. And right now, the United States Treasury is staring at a ledger written in blood and red ink. We've talked about the physics. We've talked about the radar. But now we need to talk about the economic execution. This is where the Russian-armed Iranian state stops being a tactical challenge and starts being an existential threat to the American way of life. Let's look at the math of attrition. An F-35 Lightning II, our standard bearer, our multi-role savior, cost the taxpayer roughly $80 million a copy. That's for the airframe alone. Add in the life cycle costs, the specialized maintenance, and the classified sensor suites, and you're looking at north of $100 million per tail number. Now, look at the other side of the equation. A Russian-made 77 N6N Interceptor, even with the export markup Tehran pays, rolls off the assembly line for about $5 million. Do the division. For the cost of one single American fighter jet, Iran can fire 16 hypersonic interceptors. In a saturation environment, we don't just lose the jet, we lose the economic inversion. Memory stakes is a wise way. In every traditional model of warfare, the defender spends more to survive. But in this theater, the U.S. is spending $80 million to lose, while the adversary is spending $5 million to win. This is a fiscal suicide pact. If the IRGC launches a volley of 20 missiles and only one connects, they've still traded $100 million in Russian hardware for an $80 million jet, a $200 million pilot training investment, and $1 billion in lost strategic capability. That's not a trade. That's a liquidation. And then there is the industrial bottleneck. This is the secret that keeps the Secretary of Commerce awake at night. If we lose 20 F-35s in a week of high-intensity conflict over the Strait of Hormuz, a very real possibility given the S-500's kill probability, how long does it take to replace them? Lockheed Martin's Fort Worth facility is a marvel, but it isn't a miracle. We are talking about a production rate that is measured in units per month, not per day. To replace those 20 jets with our current supply chain vulnerabilities and microchip dependencies, you are looking at a lead time of 18 to 24 months. Now look at the human cost. You can't 3D print a combat pilot. To take a candidate from flight school to the cockpit of a 5th generation fighter takes 3 years and roughly $11 million in direct costs. But that's just the baseline. To get a pilot with the tactical maturity to survive in a contested environment, someone who understands the nuances of electronic warfare and low observable maneuvering, you need a decade of experience. You lose a pilot in the Gulf, and you've lost a decade of institutional knowledge that cannot be replaced by a draft or a surge. Meanwhile, the Russian and Iranian defense manufacturing base is built for the long grind. Their systems are modular. Their production lines are hardened, decentralized, and most importantly, renewable. They aren't building Ferraris, they're building Kalashnikovs that fly. While we are debating the cost overruns of a new software patch, they are churning out interceptors and drones in facilities buried 300 feet under the Zagros Mountains. They can afford to be wrong 1,000 times. We only have to be wrong once. But the economic execution doesn't stop at the shoreline. It ripples out into the global marrow. The Persian Gulf is the jugular of the world's energy supply. 20% of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. The moment the first S-500 battery went active, the insurance industry, Lloyd's of London, the giants who actually decide where ships go, recalculated the risk of the entire region. Insurance premiums for tankers in the Gulf didn't just go up, they metastasized. We are seeing a 400% increase in war risk surcharges. That cost doesn't stay in the boardrooms. It hits the gas pump in Ohio. It hits the manufacturing costs in Germany. It's a global tax levied by Iranian radar. If the U.S. Navy cannot guarantee the safety of these lanes because they are terrified of the Interceptor math, then the U.S. Navy ceases to be the guarantor of global trade. And that is the killing blow. Since 1944, the US dollar has reigned supreme as the global reserve currency for one reason: the US military made the world safe for the dollar. The petrodollar system relies on the unspoken agreement that oil is traded in greenbacks, and in exchange, the American fleet keeps the oil flowing. But what happens when the fleet is forced to stay 500 miles offshore because of the S-500's reach? What happens when the world sees that the $13 billion USS Gerald R. Ford is being held hostage by a battery of $5 million Russian missiles? The confidence evaporates. We are already seeing the tremors. Nations are starting to look at multi-currency trade settlements. They are looking at the BRICS Plus framework. They are looking at a world where the American security umbrella has holes in it. If the dollar loses its status as the world's primary reserve currency, the economic execution is complete. We won't be able to print our way out of the next war because no one will want the paper. The Pentagon is terrified because they've realized this isn't a war of maneuvers. It's a war of exhaustion. Russia didn't just arm Iran to win a regional skirmish. They armed Iran to break the American machine. Every time we scramble a jet, every time we deploy a carrier, we are burning through the dwindling capital of a superpower that has overextended its credit. The S-500 isn't just a missile system. It's a repo man. And it's come to collect on 30 years of American hubris. The silence in Brussels during the NATO Emergency Summit wasn't the silence of deliberation. It was the silence of a funeral. 72 hours after the blackout, the map of the world has been redrawn, not by diplomats, but by the cold, radiating logic of L-band radar and hypersonic kinetic energy. The New World Order isn't a theory anymore. It's a 600-kilometer radius of denied space. Let's look at the regional fallout. Israel's red lines used to be the gold standard of Middle Eastern deterrence. If Iran moved a centimeter toward a nuclear threshold, or if a sophisticated shipment crossed the border, the IAF would reach out and touch it with impunity. Not anymore. Right now, the F-35 Adir squadrons, the pride of the Israeli Air Force, are grounded. Not by a lack of will, but by a mathematical certainty. The S-500 batteries now active near Isfahan and Bushehr have turned the eastern Mediterranean into a high-risk transit zone and the Persian Gulf into a no-go area. Israel is facing a tactical siege. Their primary strategic tool, preemptive air superiority, has been neutralized. For the first time since 1967, Jerusalem is looking at a sky they do not own. And while NATO bickers over Article 5 interpretations in a panicked Brussels ballroom, Beijing is watching. And they are smiling. China's strategic calculation in the Pacific has just been accelerated by a decade. They didn't need to fire a single shot to see the American stealth myth shattered. Every sensor log, every telemetry feed from the S-500's engagement with American assets is being funneled directly to the PLA's strategic support force. They are learning exactly how to blind the 7th Fleet. To the Chinese, the Interceptor math we discussed is a blueprint for the conquest of the first island chain. If the U.S. can't afford to lose its interceptors in the Gulf, it certainly can't afford to lose them in the Taiwan Strait. China now knows that the American arsenal is a finite, brittle thing. They see a superpower that is mission killed by its own overhead costs. Now look at the new map. Take a compass. Put the point on the Iranian coast. Draw a circle with a 600-kilometer radius. Now do it again from the Russian bases in Syria. Those circles are the transparency zones. Within those lines, the S-500 Prometheus and its network siblings have created a no-fly zone for the 21st century. It's not just that we can't fly there. It's that we can't afford the permission to fly there. Inside those circles, the sanctuary is dead. Every tanker, every AWACS, every carrier is a visible, trackable, and ultimately a deletable asset. The Middle East has been effectively severed from the Western security architecture. The global commons are no longer common. They are partitioned. And this brings us to the chilling conclusion of this deep dive. For 80 years, the bedrock of American power was the freedom of the skies. We believed that American ingenuity and American steel could overcome any geography, any adversary, and any distance. We built a global empire on the assumption that we could always see the enemy, but the enemy could never see us. That era ended 72 hours ago. We are witnessing the geopolitical execution of the American century. It wasn't a slow decline. It was a sudden, violent collision with the limits of our own technology and the ruthlessness of our rivals. We are entering a multipolar gridlock. Maesas, ni menos to say a world where the sky is no longer a shield, but a ceiling. The S-500 didn't just stop our missiles. It stopped our momentum. It forced us to realize that we have been building a military for a world that no longer exists, a world where we were the only ones who knew the math. Now, the math is public. The physics are unforgiving, and the cost of being wrong is more than we can pay. The U.S. is currently in a state of strategic paralysis. We can't retreat without collapsing the global economy, and we can't advance without bankrupting our military. We are stuck in the gridlock. The radar screens may have come back on, but what they're showing is a world where we are no longer the hunters. We are the ones being watched. We are the ones being calculated. We are the ones waiting for the tone to start. The gridlock is here. The world has changed. Subscribe to Global Gridlock to stay ahead of the curve. I'm Jack Sterling. Stand by for the next update. It's going to be a long night.